All right. Before we get started, I'm just going to do some quick housekeeping because I know we're going to have a ton of people piling in. Um, Real quickly, our next in-person events, we just got back from the Kentucky Derby, which was a blast. Next, we're going to go watch Brandy Chastain's brand new team, Bay FC, play in San Jose. We're going to spend the game with Brandy, which will be a cool experience. She's the best and a big part of our Outlier Project community. So it's going to be exciting to support her inaugural team, which is like most inaugural professional sports teams. They're taking their lickings a little bit, but Brandy will get them on the right track. So we've got that July 6th. Then we're all going to the US Open. Then we've got our retreat. Our retreat is incredibly unique. So we call it Living with Legends. So you literally are living with 4 days at the #1 hotel in the Northeast, top 100 in the world. This year, our legends are Robert Hamilton Owens, who at 72 rode across the Atlantic for 43 straight days. Joe Jacoby, Olympic gold medalist, Mace Curran, second female ever to fly lead solo for the Thunderbirds, Megan Riley from Shark Tank, and Jackie Summers, who's got the #1 most awarded liqueur in the world. So if you want to spend 4 days at the best hotel in the Northeast and learn a lot and walk away with amazing friendships, let me know. We can talk more about the retreat. And I just wanted to say, yesterday, we launched Outlier Magazine with Candace Nelson, who is a guest shark on Shark Tank and New York Times bestselling author and TV personality and founder of Sprinkles, blah, 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 all that great stuff on the cover. The reception has been like literally overwhelming, and I wanted to thank you all for subscribing. And now I'm thinking, I don't know why we made it free because everyone seems to really love it. So maybe we left a little money on the table. Um, the format for today, just for anyone who's new to an Outlier Project event, it's a little bit different. So Michael and I are going to do like a little bit of an informal fireside chat for about 30 minutes. And then we open it up for live Q&A, which I think is where a lot of the magic happens. And it's always pretty cool, whether it's Rudy Rudiger, whether it's Jesse Itzler or Brandy Chastain or Michael Easter. It's just cool to get an opportunity to talk live with these folks that you see them on prominent podcasts or on TV, but you very rarely get an opportunity to actually interact with them. So that's our format. If you have a question, just put in the chat, I've got a question. Kathy will let me know, and then I'll tee you up with Michael. But I am unbelievably excited to have Michael Easter with us. So Michael and I connected back in December, thanks to an introduction from Jamie. He's an amazing guy, two-time New York Times best-selling author of Comfort Crisis and Scarcity Brain. These books are unbelievable. We're going to talk a lot about them today. You've probably seen him multiple times on the Joe Rogan Experience, #1 podcast as far as I know in the world. I know people that would cut off their arm to be on the Joe Rogan Experience, and Joe has a serious affinity for Michael, so that's pretty cool. Michael's also a professor at UNLV, and he's been a longtime contributor to Men's Health. And I just think the topic, so this is a community built on the premise that anybody can be ordinary, but we all have the power to choose to be extraordinary. So we're all seeking to live an extraordinary life. And I really think that you cannot live an extraordinary life if you don't really understand the things that Michael talks about in both of his books, Comfort Crisis and Scarcity Brain. So I'm super excited to dig in, and I have way more questions than I have time to ask them. So Kathy, get us started. Thank you to Mike Perlow for putting that intro together. Michael, what'd you think? Good intro?
That was awesome. That was a heck of an introduction. Yeah, I've never seen one better.
Well, we are absolutely thrilled to have you. You're everything you write about in your books, everything you talk about, is so up our alley. And I'm just excited to really dive into that. I guess my first question, I'm going to kind of go back to, how did you become the guy who writes The Comfort Crisis and Scarcity Brain? And I've heard you say that you were born into booze, bullshit, and bedlam. So let's start there and we'll take it from there.
Yeah, so I my parents met when they were both actively drinking and using drugs, and the Easter side of my family is well known in the Idaho State Penitentiary system. Now, at a certain point, my dad goes to rehab. So when he's at rehab, the rehab place, they give my mom this book that my dad's supposed to be reading in rehab. And they say, all right, lady, like, read this book so you can understand what this dude is going through. And then when he gets out, you'll be able to help him. So my mom is sitting in a bathtub one night, drinking a gin and tonic and reading the rehab book. And it occurs to her that everything in there applies to her as well. So she decides she's going to get sober too. So my dad gets out of rehab. My mom is sober. He's sober. He stays sober for, like 2 weeks, which is just enough time to impregnate her and then take off for good. So my mom managed to stay sober, and she raised me as a single mother, which when you look at the odds of how that works out, it's not good odds. So 50% of single mothers live in what the government considers extreme poverty. That's like $200 a week or less. But my mom was an exceedingly hard worker. So she started this independent women's clothing company. She was a sales rep for different clothes. And she worked really hard to build us a good life. Now, we weren't rich or anything, but it was a very good life. Because of my parents and especially my Easter family's background with drugs and alcohol, I told myself from a young age, you probably shouldn't drink, dude. Like, that's probably a bad plan for you. But I did, and I was right. And so by the time I'm in my 20s, I found myself with a drinking problem. And I like to say a good way to know that you have a drinking problem is that all of your problems are caused by your drinking. So I had tried to stop a lot of times, and it never took. But I think the problem is that I was always trying to find the easy, most comfortable way to lessen my drinking or to stop drinking. And at a certain point, I just realized, like, oh, this is probably going to be really hard, really uncomfortable. And that's part of the deal. And I just kind of leaned into that discomfort of getting sober and got sober. And I'll tell you what, my life improved. Like, yeah, it was hell for a while. Don't get me wrong. Most uncomfortable thing I've done. But after going through that, my life improved just across the board. Like everything, things you could measure, things you couldn't measure. And at the time I was working at a big magazine, Men's Health magazine, and basically everything we wrote about also had that same story of if you wanted to improve your life, you had to go through this sort of short-term discomfort to get a long-term benefit. And so I think that experience, getting sober, this realization that it took doing something that was challenging in the short term that gave me a long-term reward, and then seeing that that is the story behind most human improvement today, sort of led me thinking about these topics.
So, I mean, I love both of the books, and I think there's some connectivity to them, like there's some connective tissue a little bit. Um, but explain to everybody kind of how they're different and then maybe some of that connective tissue.
Yeah, the comfort crisis, it basically looks at how, as the world has become more and more comfortable in a lot of different ways, we have lost a lot of the things that keep us healthy, that keep us happy, that give us meaning. So if you look at your day-to-day life, the things that most impact your experience of your day-to-day life right now, they're all new technologies that are designed to make your life easier and more effortless. So everything from climate control to how you get from point A to point B, to the fact that we're communicating right now through screens instead of all doing this together. The food system, where you get your food, the effort you put in to get it, on and on and on. Now, this is a result of progress. These are all good things, but they also come with a lot of downsides. And so that's what the book explores, and it explores how reinserting some of the discomforts that humans evolved to face, because for all of time, life was uncomfortable, it was hard, but by going through that, we often got benefits. Those can still benefit your life. So that's the comfort crisis. Now, scarcity brain it sort of looks at this question of, everyone knows that everything is fine in moderation, and yet we all suck at moderation. And so why is that? The book looks into that question. And so, I argue that when you looked at how humans evolved, we evolved in environments where everything we needed to survive and thrive was scarce, and it was hard to find. Everything from food to stuff to information to the number of people we could influence, on and on and on. But all those things, we now have an abundance of them. And we don't necessarily have a governor telling us, hey, you've had enough. Because for all of time, it always made sense to, if you got the opportunity, to overdo those things, to do those things to excess, to never moderate. But today, our inability to moderate backfires. And so the book looks at that question, and it looks at how you begin to sort of find enough. And it also gets into how we're at a point now where technology is really driving us to a point where consumption is just at an all-time high of all kinds of different things. Even screen time, and there's a lot of businesses that are using these sort of evolutionary habit loops to drive us into way more than we need. And we're suffering a lot of consequences.
Yeah, so fascinating. Talk to us about our relationship to nature and challenges and doing physical things, because that seems like it's changed dramatically over the decades.
Yeah. Well, if you think of humans in the past, we were outdoorsy in the sense that we lived outside, right? We were camping every single day. Now the average person spends 93% of their time indoors. And so that is just a fundamental shift in how we spend our time and attention. Then, not to mention, you go, okay, well, humans lived outdoors. Well, what were we doing out there? We were doing hard things. We were having to, life as humans evolved, we basically had 3 goals: find some food, have some kids, don't die. All of those things are hard, right? Think of the act of finding food. People literally spend their days just walking the earth, sometimes running down food to hunt. Every single thing we would do took effort. So a good comparison is that to understand how physically active humans were in the past, researchers will look at the remaining hunter-gatherer tribes we have. And when you look at the activity levels of hunter-gatherer tribes, they're about 14 times more active than we are today. So we've really engineered not just physical effort, but physical effort in nature from our days. Because the other thing is too, is when we go, okay, we are suffering health problems because we're so physically inactive. What do? We go, well, maybe if we just invented some buildings that you go into and you could run on like a motorized track and you could pick some things up and put them down, right? We invent this thing called exercise and we do it for 30 minutes a day or 45, whatever it is, inside a air-conditioned building. But when you think about the context of physical activity in nature, there's so many more stimuli you're getting. One, spending time in nature is one of the best things you can do for your mental health. Two, there's a lot more things happening. So think about running on a trail versus running on a treadmill. On a treadmill, you can zone out and watch The Price is Right. On a trail, you're having to account for all these different factors. You're not just running, right? Like the trail, you're going to have to figure out where am I going to put my feet. It's like moving, like playing Tetris with your feet, basically. You're going to have to account for your pacing based on hills and all these different variabilities. You're going to have to account for weather exposure, on and on and on. And so there's these scientists at USC who argue that because humans evolved in a context of doing a lot of physical activity outside, which includes that mental element, doing more exercise in the outdoors could be protective against diseases like Alzheimer's and different neurodegenerative diseases, simply because you're getting this brain stimulus too. And we've engineered that out. So that was kind of a long answer, but there's a lot of there, and it's something I love. So
it's great. And I think you're taking a personal shot for the video I sent you this morning, because I sent him a video. I was on the treadmill. And I know I said at the end, listen, I know you're going to say you should be outside, but listen, I'm on the treadmill. But
here's what I would say, though. I would say that when you look at physical activity, only 20% of people meet the physical activity guidelines. So if someone asks me what should I do, I don't immediately say, hey, go outside and do. I say, well, where are you at now?
Right.
It's like you go like fit this in your life any way you can. I'll go to the gym and use the treadmill. It's just like thinking about it from a grand context of like, what's kind of the best case scenario. So
what were your thoughts? Did you watch the Blue Zone?
I didn't. No.
Okay. I think it was, it's interesting because one of the parts of the Blue Zone, which is these zones in the world where people are living exponentially longer than others.
Mm-hmm.
And there was a bunch of common denominators, and community was one, but another one was just physical activity. And a lot of it was just these people that are 80 years old, they're still out in a garden, squatting down, pulling weeds, like things that we think like, okay, that's not, because we think of physical activity as, like Michael said, you got to go to a gym and pump iron, but it's really just staying active out in nature, doing those things that I think we've really sucked out of our lives. And at least in that study, it seemed to show a dramatic result in terms of longevity. It's funny because when you talk about us engineering these things out of our lives, I'm watching Shark Tank the other night, and Candace Nelson, who was on the cover of a magazine that we just launched, she invests in, which I got to give her shit about this. She invests in this thing called Flouse, which is an electronic flossing device. And I'm like, have we gotten that lazy that we cannot use regular floss? Like we have to buy an electronic device now so she invested like $250,000 in a electronic flossing device. But I don't know, is that the slippery slope we're on?
Here's a stat that I always talk about. 2%. That is the percent of people who take the stairs when there's also an escalator available. So what this tells us is that humans are wired to do the next easiest, most comfortable thing, even when it's against our interests. So 100% of people know that if they just took the stairs, yeah, it would be uncomfortable in the short term, but they would get a better long-term return on their health, probably on their mental health too. And yet we default to comfort and ease. Now, the reason for that, it goes back to what I said about the environments that our ancestors evolved in. They always took effort. And so if you could save effort, you would save calories. Calories were at a premium. Food was hard to find. You didn't want to expend any extra effort. This is why exercise is hard. Our body like developed all these sorts of governors and discomforts that basically say, don't do this because you're burning energy. And like, we need energy and it's hard to find. This obviously backfires in a world today where we have escalators and elevators and electric tooth flossers and on and on and on. Right. But that explains that. I mean, this is a big theme of my work. This idea that, every day we face decisions in life that are just like that, right? Am I going to take the escalator and it's going to be easy in the short term, but it could potentially harm me in the long term? Or I could take the stairs, which is harder in the short term, but you get a better long-term return. Like my newsletter that I send out is literally called the 2% newsletter because that is just, I think, the overarching theme of how people can improve. And people will often say, oh, like the stairs, that just taking the stairs can't make that much of a difference. There was just a study came out that said taking 3 flights of stairs a day, how much time is that? Like 60 seconds? It reduced all-cause mortality in a group of women by like 35%.
Yep.
I mean, this stuff adds up. And I think we often overlook that. Another great example is that people who simply move more throughout the day, like taking the stairs, parking in the farthest parking lot, maybe you carry your groceries and sometimes instead of take the cart, on and on and on. That can add up to more than 800 calories burned across the day, which that's the equivalent of, roughly an 8-mile run. And yet we like totally overlook that, right? If I said, go do an 8-mile run, you'd be like, oh my God, that's so much exercise. But we don't realize how much just this little stuff throughout the day can add up. And I think to bring it back to your comment about the blue zones, I think that's why, one of the reasons why those people tend to live longer is they're just simply more generally active throughout the day. Like they're not doing CrossFit, but they're just lightly active all day.
Right.
And they're always moving. And that seems to be really protective also for the long term.
Every time I'm in an airport, I think about you. So we were coming back from the Kentucky Derby and we were going down to baggage claim and there were, I don't know, maybe 100, maybe a little bit less people going down to baggage claim. There were 3 people that took the stairs, me, my wife, and Kathy. That's it. We were the only ones on the stairs. And we've gotten into, so if you follow Michael on Instagram in particular, you'll see him rucking through airports all over the world. And the amount of mileage you can get is truly insane. Like Meg and I did it once, and I forgot what the number was, but it was high. Like we got a lot of really good work in. So you could sit there on your ass, or you can do something that's productive.
Totally. And like, I'm not telling people to like power walk and get sweaty. I mean, it's just like, just stroll around the airport. You're going to see more interesting things. And if you walk around the airport for about an hour, that's equivalent to about 3 miles. I mean, that totally adds up.
So I posted something 2 weeks ago about both of my kids. So this is 2 things that happened in 48 hours. So in 48 hours time, my youngest son, for his 29th birthday, he climbed the highest mountain in America, Mount Whitney, or in the continental United States. And then he snowboarded down. He sprinkled his Nana's ashes at the summit, and then he snowboarded down. And within 48 hours, his older brother went to jail. And people ask me two things. Are you going to try to convince Cooper, my youngest, to not climb the mountain and snowboard down because it's really dangerous? And actually, a couple days after he did it, two people died on Mount Whitney. And the other one was, are you going to bail your son out of jail? And my answer to both was no, because I think one of the things that we do is we try to strip away any adversity from our kids. And when we strip away adversity from our kids, we're ruining their ability to build resiliency. And, so you talk about helicopter parents and snowplow parents, and how important is that? Like, how important is that deliberate discomfort that we need to allow ourselves and others to go through?
Yeah. I'll preface this question by saying I don't have kids, which either makes me the worst person to give advice around this or the best because I have no skin in the game. I'm a professor. I look at data, and here's what the data says. Starting around 1990s when you had the rise of helicopter parenting. And this was largely because of some high profile kidnappings that led parents to become afraid that their kid was going to get kidnapped. So it was like that whole deal of be home when the streetlights are on, no longer, right? You can't go out and be unsupervised anymore. You can't just roam free. And what you start to see this real uptick in mental health problems among kids born after those dates. Now, it's not like it's all encompassing, but there is a steep rise, and they believe that is one of the key issues. Because when you are out roaming the world unsupervised, you learn a lot. You face a lot of challenges, but ultimately people learn through challenge, right? You're on the playground, you and your gang of friends, and you encounter another gang of kids, like maybe you have a conflict. But in doing that and not having the parents immediately come in and break it up, you learn how to have conflicts, how to come to resolutions, what you can say and not say to another person before they'll smack you in the face, right? There's all these different things, and you're having to figure things out on your own ultimately. And the less we have people figure things out on their own and do things for people, the less skills they're picking up that help them navigate the world in the future. And that holds for adults too. If you hire someone and you do all the work for them, how good of an employee are they going to be? Like, not at all, right?
Right.
And so that kind of holds in a lot of different contexts.
I came up with a business idea for you and I this morning on the treadmill. So actually, you can either steal it or we'll go in 50-50 partners. So instead of, we're going to make t-shirts that they don't say I'm born again. They're going to say I'm bored again. Tell me or tell us why we should celebrate boredom a little bit.
Yeah, so the average person spends.
It's a good idea, isn't it?
I do like the idea. Yeah,
I'm bored again.
I like it.
Just saying.
So the average person spends more than 12 hours a day on digital media. So that's from cell phones, that's from computers, that's from television, that's from podcasts, that's from radio, that's from on and on and on, right? We have all these stimulations. And so when people face boredom, we have easy, effortless escapes from it, right? You can pull out your cell phone. I'm sure everyone has had the experience of standing in line for groceries or whatever, and you just automatically, without thinking about it, pull out your phone and you're in that app that you spend too much time in. Now, to understand why boredom can be a good thing in this context, it's important to understand what boredom is in the first place. So boredom is this evolutionary discomfort that basically tells us whatever you're doing with your time right now, your time has worn thin, or your return on your time has worn thin. So go do something else. Right. So if it was 1,000 years ago, or let's say 1,000,000 years ago, and we're all hunting and there's no animals coming through, boredom basically would kick on and say, go do something else because you need food, right? We need food or we're going to starve. And so we would go pick potatoes, we'd pick berries, we would do this something else that would improve our lives. But today, when we feel this boredom, it's like we just pull out the phone and go onto Instagram, go onto Twitter. And you could argue it's not as productive as it used to be. So I think in this context, reinserting boredom into your life and seeing where it leads you beyond a digital device can be really beneficial. And there's research backing up the idea that spending more time bored can lead to decreases in stress simply because we're so hyperstimulated today with media. There's some evidence that it can create creativity, it can increase productivity, and also it's just something different than more screen time, which,
Yeah.
when you look back on your life, you're not going to wish you had spent more time on TikTok, but you may wish you had spent more time sort of thinking and analyzing your life, which is what can happen in boredom. When you face boredom, you start to mind wander, and mind wandering is associated with all these good things.
Yeah. So a good friend of mine, Colin O'Brady's the first guy to ever, walk across Antarctica unaided. And he came up with a concept called the 12-hour walk, which we all done as a community, which is no electronic devices and you're out for 12 hours and it's magical. I'm curious. I think prominence and money can make people very, very comfortable. And I'm curious, I've got some friends that I think are probably mutual friends. Joe DeSena is one who is the founder of Spartan. Jesse Itzler is another. Colin O'Brady's another that despite their prominence or fame or the monetary rewards that they've gotten for that, they've maintained the ability to continue to do tough shit. Has that become, as you've grown in prominence, um, have you found that to be more difficult for yourself?
Um, no, I mean, in some cases, for example, my sort of favorite annual thing to do is go um, hunting in the backcountry every fall. And this last year, with scarcity brain coming out in the fall, I basically lost that. So yeah, there's some conflict, but I think on a day-to-day cadence, it's like I just have to schedule in time to go outside and do something. I just have to make sure that I treat it almost like I would a meeting. Like it's not a optionality thing for me. And part of why I enjoy it so much, going out for a trail run or whatever it might be, is because it gives me, it's like my away time, you know? It's my like escape time. I'm going to leave my phone. I'm not going to be checking emails. I'm not going to be checking texts. And I'm going to be able to sort of remove myself from everything. And, for me, the benefits of exercise and doing challenging things are 100% psychological. The fact that, it cleans out my heart and all these other things is just kind of a side benefit.
We have so many people that want to ask you questions. They want me to shut up as immediately as I possibly can. But this is a wacky question. I'm sure you've never been asked this before, but it popped into my head. So you don't have kids, but you've got two fur babies. So Stockton and Conway are like
Yep.
your travel companions. And I was thinking of this because my wife is on this call, Meg, and every time we're out for a walk and we see somebody pushing a stroller and there's a dog in it, I'm like, you, and if there's any people on this call, I'm not really apologizing. It's the most ridiculous thing I've ever seen. So it seems like there's almost a comfort crisis, even with pets, in that, and maybe I'm making this up. When I was a kid, there were no pets getting like ACL surgery. Like what's happened? We're pushing our pets in carriages. Are we insane? What's happened? Like does the comfort crisis extend to pets?
Well, I can tell you that my neighborhood also has some pet pushers, and I also find it hilarious. Um, so when I'm reporting Scarcity Brain, there is a chapter on the basically stuff, how we evolve to accumulate stuff in the form of tools, because that used to give us a survival advantage, right? You wanted like tools that could help you survive. Now, applied to today's day and age, we still have this drive to accumulate, but we live in a world of Amazon Prime, of Walmart, of Target, of insert anywhere else you can buy stuff. And so the average home now has anywhere from 10,000 to 50,000 items. So even 150 years ago, take outfits, for example, the average person owned 3 outfits. The stuff in their home was like handed down. It was like, there was rather Spartan, there's a handful of stuff in there. And now it's 10,000 to 50,000. And this also extends to pets. So when you look at the average pet in the United States, the average pet owns more stuff than the average human would have owned in the US like 300 years ago. The pet stuff industry is worth billions. It is insane. I mean, even pets are living a life that is unbelievable in the grand scheme of time and space. So a lot of the arguments around my book are that, we don't realize what an incredible time it is to be alive right now.
Right.
I'm not saying the world is perfect by any means, but what I am saying is that on average, especially if you live in the US, especially if you're on this call or reading books, it's unbelievable to be alive right now.
Yeah.
It's so unbelievable. And yet there's good reasons why we don't often see that. The way our brain is wired, we are literally wired to find problems, which leads us to complain, and which leads us to miss the fact that we have not only won the lottery of being alive, but like the super mega bajillion-dollar lottery of being alive right now. And that even extends to Stockton and Conway.
All right, guys. I would say you got to buy the books because there's so many questions I wanted to ask, and I'll leave you with a cliffhanger. If you want to find out how hoarders and minimalists, what they have in common, you got to read the book. But there's so much good stuff in these books. You've got to get them. Our first question. So we have a community member. He's a 2-time Olympian. He's an Olympic gold medalist. His name's Joe Jacoby. He lives in Spain. And he was so bummed out that he could not be on this call that he made a video to ask you a question. So our first question is coming from Olympic gold medalist Joe Jacoby in Spain. Kathy, do you have that teed up?
This is awesome.
I did have it teed up and it just fried. Hold on one second.
Oh no.
No, I got it. I got it. Hold on.
All right.
I've never seen that before.
If you want me to go to somebody else, Kath, I can.
Yeah,
You
go
want me
to
to go to
somebody
somebody-
else. It's not playing. Hold on. Go. I mean, go to somebody else. Give me a minute.
All right. Let's see. Mondo, you're up.
Michael, appreciate you being with the group. This is awesome. Ton of notes so far. One thing that I'm really curious about, a piece of advice that you've had, and whether it's been given to you or it's been through research, it completely contradicts conventional wisdom, what should be the outcome, but it's actually proven to be effective.
A piece that I have come across that is, okay, so it's got to be useful, but it is against conventional wisdom. That's a good question. Let me think about that for a second. here's how I'll answer that, I guess. I do a lot in like health and performance and all these different things. I think that there's a lot of rules in that space that work, but they work on accident. They don't work why we think they work. So, for example,
Michael Easter,
oh,
Go ahead. Go ahead. Go ahead.
so for example, don't eat after 6 p.m. or don't eat after 7 p.m., right? That's a big food rule. Don't eat added sugars. Don't eat seed oils. Don't ever eat junk food, blah, 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 blah.
outliers, greedy.
These rules, they they all work, but not for the reasons that often get explained on the internet, right? So if like the people on the internet will be like, well, when you eat after 7 p.m., your body goes into this special mode where it hoards fat, or like sugar raises your blood sugar, and blah 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 blah, on and on and on. All these different reasons. When in reality, simple rules like this, they usually work for much more nuanced things, that for a much more simple reason. It usually tends to be because they simply give people a simple rule to follow that leads them to eat less. Now, that doesn't make them wrong, but there's a lot of rules out there. This is like kind of a general thing that I like to say are 99% right, but 100% wrong. Meaning, yeah, they work, but not for the reasons that everyone thinks. And so I think like part of anytime you hear a universal rule, to kind of give, I guess, a universal idea here, is unpacking why it works can often be informative because it gives you more freedom, because rules are ultimately constraining, right? And so by understanding why a rule might work in the first place, you can then make wiser decisions no matter what your goal is. I don't know if that answered your question. It seems like I kind of veered off, but hopefully it was useful.
Oh, that's so good. So good. Appreciate it. That's awesome.
All right, we're going take 2. Olympic gold medalist Joe Jacoby.
Hey, bon dia, Michael Easter. Bon dia, outliers. Greetings from the Balearic Island of Formentera. Michael, I just love your books. I devoured Comfort Crisis and Scarcity Brain, recommended them to so many of my coaching clients. And here's my question for you. It's about value capture. So about 3 months ago, I started a weekly essay called Thinking in Waves, where I write about lessons learned and ideas that transfer from paddling a surf ski, surfing offshore waves out in the ocean, to a clearer model for innovative thinking, values alignment, and making better choices. So here's the thing, it's just a very black and white written essay. The response has been terrific, but I know there's an opportunity to make it better. Maybe like buy a GoPro camera and bring people out onto the water. But that's where the value capture comes in. I worry that I will kind of lose that love and touch for the water if I'm thinking about capturing video on a GoPro. So I would love your advice on this, and keep 2 things in mind. I'm a 5-day-a-week runner that for the last 5 years, I've never used a piece of technology while running. And secondly, it's not lost on me that right now Maria is putting her life in danger by holding a selfie stick while I make this video for you to get the answer. So this is us, and I look forward to seeing your response. Thank you so much, and keep writing. I love your books. Bon dia, everyone.
I love this dude. That was amazing. What a cool dude. To answer his question for the group, for context, this idea of value capture is that, in short, once you start to measure something with a easily quantifiable number, we often lose track of why we do the thing in the first place. So I will give you an example of Twitter. Right, so Twitter bills itself as this platform for discussion. And so then the next question is, okay, well, what are the goals of a discussion? And the answer to that is that there's a lot of goals to a discussion, right? It's to understand someone, it's to be understood, it's to commiserate, it's to complain, it's to all these different things, right? A discussion has a million different goals, a million different outcomes, a million different things it could be. But when you put discussion on Twitter and gamify it and quantify it with the clear value of likes or retweets or follower counts, people start to only value that clear number and measuring system of likes and retweets and follower counts. And the way that their behavior changes on the system, So for example, what gets you the most likes, the most retweets, the most followers isn't necessarily going to be what makes a good discussion, right? Because when you look at what people do on Twitter to get likes and retweets and followers, it tends to be combative content. It tends to be controversial takes. It tends to be hot takes. It tends to be all these things that are often at odds with the original goal of a discussion, which are many. Another example would be in the world of grades, where, the point of going to school is multivariable, right? You go to school to learn the material. You go to school to learn how to interact with other people. You go to school so you can learn to do things on time in a timely manner. But when you start putting grades on academic performance, students start to obsess about grades. They lose sight of all these different reasons that they're at school for, and they all obsess about GPA. And I can tell you this because I was a professor for 7 years, and that is all students care about. And we lose a lot of the nuance of why we do the thing we do when we start to quantify it and gamify it, and that is this idea of value capture. So I experienced this because I would I started posting my runs on Instagram, and the whole reason that I ran in the first place was because it was like this mental health thing for me. Like, I'd go out in the desert, it was kind of like a moving meditation, and my mind would kind of go to all these different interesting places it needed to go. Well, when I start putting my runs and photos of my runs on Instagram and start getting points for that, likes, comments, whatever, it changed the nature of my run, because I'd be running around a bend, and instead of thinking like, oh man, nature is beautiful, everything is great, I'd be like, oh wow, this is a great photo for Instagram. We got to stop and take a photo of that. And so that literally changes my experience of that run. So to answer Joe's question, I think if I were him, I would just leave the technology on the shore and not take it out. I mean, what is the upside? Yeah, you might get some upside from filming things. At the same time, if this fundamentally changes this thing that you absolutely love to do, then I don't think that's worth it.
Fantastic. I'm thanking you on Joe's behalf. All right, we're going to Brad Mason. Brad, you're up.
Michael, how you doing, man? Good to see you. So segue off of that. So I found, so with the Give team, I would go out and capture footage, and I am never in the videos or never in the pictures, but I found myself more for the presentation than for the experience. And that took away. So 100% what you just said, just, put the phone in the pocket and keep moving. So my question, very simple. What came first, the caribou hunt or the idea for the comfort crisis? I know you mentioned that you've wrote a lot of the pieces and parts before the caribou hunt, and it kind of fit in. But at what point did the idea of the comfort crisis come in? Was it before or after you went on the hunt?
Yeah, that's a good question, and good to see you, man.
Good to see you too.
Yeah, I think that I had the idea for the book came first, but I had sort of backing up. I had done a story for Men's Health that was with it profiled Donnie Vincent, and we went on this hunt for like a week in Nevada. And I started kind of really, I would say that that's when I realized that this idea of how our level of comfort has changed between the past and today, and how that's really affected us. That's probably where that idea came from. And so then, putting more nuance on that idea, I guess I would say. And then from there, it was, okay, I feel like this could be a book. Because sometimes you write a magazine article and you're like, I got to keep it to 4,000 words, but this could easily be 20, 30,000 words. I mean, there's a lot here. And so once I realized it could probably be a book, it sort of seemed natural to have the caribou hunt as the overarching narrative, simply because it allowed me to get into all of the topics I really needed to get into. It was like kind of the muse, I guess, I needed to get into the main discomforts that we've woven out of our life.
Yeah, that's awesome. I've told you this before, but that I just love how how it flows and how you just kind of pockmark it with the bullets that we all need to pay attention to, and just how it all wraps up at the end. So, but yeah, good seeing you, man.
Yeah, likewise, man. It's great to see you.
Rachel, you're up with Michael.
Hi there. Michael, thanks so much for your time today. I have a question. It's definitely not a softball, but I jotted it down so I remembered how I wanted to write it. How does trauma interfere with our ability to purposefully seek out discomfort? So, for instance, how does the brain's tolerance for discomfort change? And the reason, I'll give a quick, very, very quick context. 4 years ago, I was out running. The thing we're supposed to do, and was hit by a pickup truck and fractured my back. And ever since then, I've been particularly just scared. I've gone through physical therapy and all sorts of other things, but I'm curious because I know other people here have experienced physical trauma or emotional trauma or other things like that. And how does that affect our brain's sort of tolerance for discomfort?
Yeah, I think it would probably be, I mean, it kind of depends on what the trauma was, but what I'll say is sort of big picture is that when you look at mental health and plot it against how many challenges or traumas a person has had in their life, on one hand, you have people who have faced sort of challenge after challenge, trauma after trauma. They unsurprisingly do not have great rates of mental health, right? They have poor mental health. But where it gets really interesting is that on the other side, people who have no traumas, no challenges, they have equally poor rates of mental health. It's people who've had a few in their life and have overcome them, have viewed them as opportunities to learn and grow and rebound and become more resilient. Those people have the best rates of mental health. So this is a long sort of way of saying that I tend to try and frame problems as opportunities, right? Life is kind of like a video game. And I'm taking this from Sam Harris because I think it's a great analogy, where as you go through the levels, if the levels were just like, there's nothing there, you just kind of go through it. There's no challenges. There's no boss you have to be. Like, it'd be a really boring video game. But you level up your skill along the way as you go through those hard levels. And I think that viewing problems and small problems, big problems as opportunities for growth is a good way to get in the mindset where you can learn from them and where you can improve from them. So in a case like yours, I do know that things like mild exposure to the trauma over time can be useful. Now, I would probably have that guided by a clinician, a professional. Like, I'm not telling anyone to just go out and, see a professional. But I do know that completely avoiding things that make you afraid is probably not a good idea in the long run, because, in your case, it's like, if you never ran again, well, it's like, that's obviously good for your physical health. It's probably also good for your mental health. It's just, you're going to have to probably go through a sort of adaptation period where it's scary for a while. But by coming out on the other side of that, though, you're going to be a lot more resilient and better off, arguably mentally stronger than when you first started running and before that happened.
Thanks.
Josiah, you're up.
And Michael, thanks so much for this time. Scott's question about children really touched me because I have a 3 and a 5-year-old, and they have never lived in a house that is not 69 degrees Fahrenheit. And that's like the reality. They're 5 and 3 years old. And so your thing about playing outside and free time, like, how do you balance the pressures of today of out to dinner, and the other parents give their kid a tablet, and I tell my kids people over devices, and why does everybody else? And so there's all these societal pressures to conform and to adapt. And so How do you embrace and overcome that with a 5 and a 3-year-old and all the external things that play into raising a child today?
Yeah, I think that's a really good question, because I do think that there is a growing group of parents who are like, I want to have my kid go outside and come back when the street lights are on. The reason I don't is because all the other parents are going to call the cops on me. Right. And so I think that if you can have, I mean, having conversations with other parents, trying to find like-minded parents and see if you can get your kids to play together in a way that feels less structured would be really useful. I do think having less structure in some sorts of play is important, because a lot of times they'll be like, all right, well, we'll get our kids to socialize under this context of like Little League or under this context of dance class. But it's like, you really want them to have these times where they're being imaginative, figuring out games, having to establish their own rules. And you're always going to have that one kid who's like the rule breaker. So then the other kids have to like navigate, all right, how do we deal with a rule breaker? Like, you really need them to figure out these things, these skills that we all have as adults, but we picked up as kids, we just don't even realize it. We picked them up on the playground. So if we take away the playground, that becomes a lot harder later in life. There's a book that I think is called Free Range Parenting that has some ideas. It's a little old now, but she might have updated it. There's some stuff in there. So yeah, I would check out that book.
Awesome. We're gonna go as quickly as we can, Sunny, and then we're going to Lauren.
All right. Thank you so much. So my question is really around the college experience for kids nowadays, right? Years ago, it was every kid should go to college, make sure you do whatever you can to prepare, and that's what you have to do. Kids felt like failures when they didn't do it. I think the world's perspective has shifted a lot on that over time. And so I'm curious of your perspective around the college experience with your intimate, knowledge of being a professor, being in the midst of that. And then also loving data and research. Like, what is that an experience you would encourage? Is that an experience that you feel like is super individual for each person?
Yeah, I think it's individual. I mean, I'll tell you that. So I would generally teach this really big 100 level intro class. It was like, hundreds of students. And then I would have one that was kind of like 400 level, like final test before you get out into the real world. And I can tell you that in that 100 level, there's a lot of students who were there just because their parents wanted them to be. They didn't want to be there. They didn't know why they were there. They had no idea what they wanted to major in or anything like that. And so I do think for students like that, even taking a year off to travel, to do whatever interesting thing before you figure out what you want to do can be useful. Because in that time, you'll probably figure out what your passions are. That'll save the parents a lot of money if they're paying, save the students a lot of money if they're taking out loans. But I do think that we're kind of at this place too where people are saying, oh, college is useless. And it's like, well, no, not really, because it's not just the academic material you're learning in college. You're learning how to get your shit together. Like, you have someone like me going, why the hell didn't you turn that in? They go, oh, well, I had work. He goes, okay, well, do you work like 100 hours a week? Well, no, I work 40. It's like, okay, well, what'd you do with your time? You go, well, let me see your phone. Let's look at your screen time. You have 8 hours on your phone every single day, dude. It seems like you have enough time to do your homework. And just having someone like, oh, okay, I guess you're right. Right. So that doesn't always happen if you don't go to college. And also interacting with other people, getting involved in student organizations. There's all these ancillary reasons why I think college can be a good path. I'm not saying it's a good path for everyone, but this idea that it's like useless now is a useless idea. That said, I think that I do think some students are probably better suited to the trades, and they've been pushed into, more academic institutions. And I do think that even going to trade schools could be could be great for people. I'm friends with Mike Rowe, and this is like his big thing. It's like, we have all these students that would be great in the trades and make incredible livings, and we've just like totally overlooked that.
Mm-hmm. Awesome. Thank you.
Yeah.
Paul, you're up.
Oh, Michael, I just want to say thank you so much for your time. blown away by the way that you reframe things in perspective. I'm curious for you, kind of a quick two-part question. What is your perspective and viewpoint on intuition, and what relationship have you found with that and being comfortable? Because I feel like so many times we know that we should get out of that situation, but we kind of choose not to. And I'm curious on your perspective.
Yeah, I mean, I think that people, in the context of like a relationship that is not productive, people will choose the short-term comfort of just sticking with it instead of having to have the short-term discomfort of a blow up or even a hard conversation, right? Couples will let things just sit and simmer for years and years and years instead of one just saying, hey, when you do this thing, it hurts my feelings, or it does this or whatever. And so I really do think you need to keep that in the back of your mind. Like, yes, this is going to suck in the short term, but it's going to improve us overall, I think. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, a little. I'm curious though, like for you though, because you talked about how you've had a massive transformation, right? Like, what was really that thing? Because there had to be some type of internal shift that made you be like, oh, I need to stop like drinking and I need to like get out of this thing. What kind of was that experience for you?
I mean, I think it was just like years and years of the crap building, and I think that eventually you hit a tipping point where the rewards from drinking are become outweighed by the negatives. So when in Scarcity Brain, I write about addiction, and people will often think that, you know, they'll look at, say, a heroin addict and say, why would a person ever do that? That doesn't make any sense for that person to do drugs. They're living on the street, they're whatever. And the problem with that is that it actually does make sense for that person to do drugs, because doing their drug of choice immediately solves their problems in the short term, right? Doing the drug of choice will always make that person's life better immediately. Whereas trying to get off drugs, that your life sucks for a really, really long time. And I can tell you, when I quit drinking, my life sucked for a while. It got a lot worse before it got better. And so for me, it was just eventually, I think, realizing that that was going to be part of the buy-in, and that, you know, I was just going to have to see what happened. Because I could also very clearly see that, like, in the long term, my life was just going to continue to be a mess long term. And so deciding to sort of walk through the hottest part of the fire rather than have a slow burnout was the solution. But I kind of big picture on that too, is that I think that people do things for a very good reason, even if we don't necessarily understand them. People don't do things because they don't get some sort of benefit, right? Like with me, I knew that drinking would probably lead me to problems in the long term, but it would solve all my problems immediately in the short term. And so it's like, I can either sit here in my bullshit, or I can have a drink, and then my life is going to improve immediately. So why wouldn't I do that? Eventually you start to realize, oh, here's why I wouldn't do that. And then that's where it starts to get interesting.
Michael, I want to be super cognizant of your time. We have 2 more questions, but if we're out of time, we're out of time.
Oh, no problem. Yeah. I'm happy to answer.
All right. So Bruce and then Ivor, you're our cleanup hitter. So Bruce and Ivor, you guys are finishing us off. Thank you, Michael. I appreciate it.
Yeah.
Michael, great discussion. As a journalist, and I'm one as well, to what extent are you concerned about misinformation, particularly around nutrition?
Oh, yeah. It's super tough. Here's what I'll say though. It's kind of one of those, like I said, with the rules thing. If people follow the information, they'll probably still get a benefit, even if it's wrong, right? So like if someone says, oh, X food, sugar is toxic, added sugar is toxic, and someone goes, okay, well, I'm going to stop eating added sugar, they're still probably going to get a benefit from that, even if it's bullshit that added sugar is toxic, right? It depends on the person. It depends on the dose. It depends on all these different things that get wiped out. And I do think that, you know, at the end of the day, like a lot of people just have zero desire to learn about the intricacies and nuances of nutrition. So if people get hard and fast rules that do help them, that can be a good thing. If they want to go deeper, there's plenty of resources for that too. Yeah, that's kind of what I think on that. I mean, my goal in my writing is to try and give people sort of that bigger picture, context to give them the nuance. Cause frankly, I think it's interesting. I think it makes for a better story. But I also realize some people just want to say, dude, just tell me what to eat. And you just go, okay, stop eating junk food. And they go, okay. And then the takeaway is like, junk food is terrible for you always. It's like, well, if you only eat junk food, yeah, you're probably not going to be healthy, but like, and then it just goes down this rabbit hole. And the reality with nutrition too, is that you can have two people in the nutrition department in different departments at Harvard who have studied these topics for 20, 30 years, and they will disagree until they're red in the face. So what does that tell me about, like, it's hard. It's totally hard.
Ivor, take us home.
Michael, thank you. So nice to meet you. I just wanted to let you know that a couple days ago, last week, my wife said, "Why are you up so late?" So I usually go to bed before her, and I read Comfort Crisis cover to cover, which I haven't done with the book in a long time. So loved it. Thank you.
That's awesome.
My question is around the science of population health management. And so everything we've been talking about on an individual level, I love it. I agree with it. If someone subscribes to it, they will think about their own mental and physical health. On a corporate level, we know there's a connection between corporate or physical and mental health and other types of well-being and performance and productivity. And some CEOs and C-suites get it and invest in it. Others look for short-term gains in terms of, like, how do you manage the health of a population while you can renegotiate your insurance contract. But what's your advice on speaking to CEOs to have them understand why it's so important to help build a culture of health and well-being within their organization?
Yeah, I mean, that's definitely tricky. I find that when I speak to companies, I'm usually getting called by the CEOs who understand this thing because they've read my book and they're like, yeah, we need this. Not always easy, although I do feel like there has been a shift in the last 20, maybe 10 years where ideas about health and wellness and mental health are becoming much bigger. For example, I'm talking to a bunch of investment people, investment leaders in New York in a couple weeks, and they're from all over, and they want me to talk about health and longevity. It's like, this conference has nothing to do with that. And they're like, yeah, come in and talk to it, because everyone's into that right now. And it's like, all right, well, that's a good thing. So I think it's one of those where probably it's gonna, it's gonna trickle up, I guess. But I think you'll start to see that become a lot more talked about, and there'll probably be more social pressures around it for leaders to do something, which would be a good thing. And I think that you'll probably just see, when you look at the numbers, having healthier employees saves money. So why would you not make that investment?
Thank you.
Yeah,
totally agree.
Phenomenal hour, Michael. Incredible. Absolutely incredible. I cannot thank you enough. If you post a picture of you pushing Stockton or Conway in a stroller, I will give you like at least $7. So I would love to see that.
Awesome.
But guys, buy Comfort Crisis, buy Scarcity Brain, and as important, read them, internalize them, write a review. Reviews mean a lot to authors. And let's support Michael for as much as he poured into us. Let's make sure that we do the same in return. So Michael, man, this was exactly what I thought it would be, which was off the charts.
Right on. Well, I'm really glad we could do this. I appreciate you all having me and hanging around and asking great questions. This was fun.
All right. Thank you, my friend.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Thanks for coming.
See ya.